Hey guys, this is Linux Next here. In today's video, we are looking at GNOME 48, which is releasing soon. I would say like next week, I think, on the 19th or the 20th for me. And we're going to be looking at the new features that are included with this desktop environment and how I think this is one of the best GNOME releases that I've seen in quite a while, because when GNOME 48 was like in its feature process, there was a couple of good features coming along, but then when it got to the release candidate stage, they started to add a lot of important things that I had personally been waiting for, because I want to see GNOME be on a similar level when it comes to their Wayland features, with something like KDE Plasma, like I said, is one of the best releases of GNOME, I would say. Now, of course, the first thing that we are going to talk about is the bugs on GNOME 48, because, you just want to get those out of the way. And I've only experienced 2 bugs, and most of them have got to do with HDR. Now, the first problem, and you guys can't see this issue, but when I enable HDR on my monitor in GNOME 48, the month here, these 2 months, for you, it looks perfectly fine, like the colors show perfectly fine with the theme that I have set, but for me, they look extremely blown out, where they're actually white. And I moved this across back to my other monitor where HDR isn't enabled, and I can see that the colors are working properly. And again, for you guys, it should look properly also. So I'll show up a video of that issue. I don't know what really creates that problem when I enable HDR, if it's something to do with the calendar application on GNOME, or if it's got something to do with how HDR is working. And then the last one has got to do with my monitor changing its brightness randomly. But the thing is, it's not my monitor that's doing it, it's GNOME that is doing it. So if I open up settings here, and if we disable HDR, wait for this to be applied, my monitor brightness looks extremely low. And I first noticed this just before when I logged in. I was just looking around of like what's new with 48, like some of the things that I maybe didn't understand yet, and I wanted to learn what they were. And as soon as I clicked on the displays option in GNOME settings, it randomly changed my brightness to the maximum, where it was like blown out. So all of my applications in my dock looked extremely bad, and you can actually see the low brightness with my capture right now. Even though I'll show up a video, my brightness on my actual monitor is set to 100. So as you can see here, my brightness is at 100 on the standard color profile. And as you can see, the brightness is extremely low. Or what happens is it's extremely bright. That's the first issue that happens. So I was logging into GNOME, I was just playing around with some apps, and my monitor, when I selected display in the GNOME settings, the monitor went extremely bright, like I just said before. And then I tried fixing it, and then it shot the brightness down really low. So it's really weird that my monitor is extremely low. I don't know if you can see the difference between these 2 monitors. I guess you can just look at the numbers, like 2 versus 1. 2, 1. As you can see, 1 looks way brighter than 2. So I don't know what necessarily causes this issue, but it is an issue with something to do with HDR. So for right now, I need to keep HDR enabled if I want my brightness to be high enough so that I can actually see my screen well enough. Now, that bug that just happened that I just told you about, that bug may not appear in the actual full release of GNOME 48. This is a release candidate, so they are going to go through probably like 1 more release candidate, I think, or like beta version and then full release. So I'm guessing if I installed GNOME 48 when it's fully released, I doubt I'm going to see this problem. But it is a problem nonetheless that I've had when using this version of GNOME 48. Now, when it comes to the new features with GNOME 48, the first one is a pretty important one, I would think, that I didn't expect GNOME to bring over into their desktop, and that is a well-being setting. So I know this is a thing on phones with iOS and Android. I know on Android, I have a well-being app or thing in my settings where I can check how much I've been staring at my phone and what apps have been like taking most of my attention or whatever. Just a whole section for that. And GNOME decided to bring it to their desktop environment. So as you can see here, these are all the days that I have been using GNOME. As you see, I haven't been using it that much, except for, you can see here, I spent 5 hours and 23 minutes in this GNOME session. And it also shows an average. It shows average week, which is 0 hour because I haven't really used it in a week. And then we can go across here to the next week, and we can see that like today, I've only spent around 22 minutes on the GNOME session. Then you can actually introduce screen limits. So let's say you have kid or something that is using GNOME. Well, you can now set a time limit so that they can, you know, get off the computer and maybe do other things like go outside or something. And with those screen limits, you can set a daily limit, and then you can also set a grayscale black and white screen for screen limits. So that's quite interesting also. And then you also do get to set some break reminders. So you can tell, you know, if you have like eyesight, you want to like rest your eyes, well, you can set those things properly. And you can set movement reminders also. So if you want to go and move around and you just forget to do that, well, you can now set a reminder, and you can set up the duration and interval. So these are like set duration and intervals. So like it happens every 20 minutes. I need to do it for a minute to do a movement break. And then it also plays a sound when this break or eyesight reminder goes off, when it ends. And one other new feature, which is something I can't show off, is a battery charge limit has been added into the Power GNOME settings, or the control center of GNOME. So you can now set a battery charge limit on your laptop. If you've been wanting that, well, now it's in GNOME. And if I do find any screenshots of this charging limit, I will show it up right now so you can see what it looks like. Now, if you are someone that likes to use the GNOME calendar application, well, you can now use a new redesign of an event dialog. So when you decide to create an event for something, there is a new design for it, which we can see right here. Now, I was trying to find an older image of the event dialog window, but I couldn't really find one that was from like GNOME 47. Looking through GNOME's GitLab real quickly, I could find one from like 4 years ago, but you know, that's not a good comparison, I would say. But anyways, this is a new design, and it allows you to do a couple of things. Like you can set it to all day now. So if you have an event you want to do all day, well, there you go, you can now do it. And there is a repeat thing also. I don't know if that is new, but I think it might be new. The one that I was reading is that there is just a new all-day time slot that you can select, and I would say this UI looks pretty damn good. Simple. You can choose, you know, if it's a personal, you can do just a normal time slot, or like again an all day, or you can add a reminder also, so it gives you notifications of that event happening. And you can also add your notes, the location, and then obviously the title of the event, of whatever you want that event to be. And one small thing with GNOME-SOFTWARE and FLATPAKs is a change of where the FLATPAK is going to use a HTTPS URI scheme for FLATPAK refs. Because for some reason they decided to change this because of different browsers. When you download a file, usually it just automatically downloads that file, and they want to change it to this URI scheme so that it's able to automatically like open into the GNOME software store for you, which just makes it a lot more easier when it comes to downloading a FLATPAK application. Like as it says here, since web browsers no longer make it easier to open a downloaded file with a specific or even the default application as soon as it's downloaded, they now just download to disk. FlatHub wants to use a different URI scheme to link to FLATPAK ref files so that they will get loaded directly in GNOME software or KDE Discover without the user having to find them in the downloads folder and launch them. So like I just said before, it just makes it a lot more easier when it comes to if you are downloading a FLATPAK from something like FlatHub, for example, and you go to download something, which I don't know if this actually works. If I go install, I don't know if it's going to, no, it's going to save the file. So I guess at least for now, you can't do it, but it is a feature that was merged on GitLab GNOME from GNOME-SOFTWARE. Now, if there is something that I enjoy about GNOME, is the applications that are supported with GTK, and they have this whole core apps and like GNOME Circle thing where they show off applications that developers have made, and they show it in a nice way that's like, hey, here's this app that does this thing or whatever. And there is a lot of good applications, I would say, when it comes to these Circle apps. But there's one application that's been in the Circle for a while, and it's still in the Circle on the main website, but it's supposed to be the new default audio player, and that is called Decibels. Now, Decibels, I would say, is not a particular audio player that, let's say, it's like a music player. It's not really that. It's more of almost like an audio recording, but there's no recorder. It's just an audio player. So if you want to play just like single files, it's really good at doing that. And I do have it installed, so we can test it out. It says here, open a audio file, and then we can go to music and we can open one. Now, I'm not going to play any of these audio because most of it is copyrighted music. So as you can see, we do have a music file loaded on Decibels or Decibels, and it does look pretty alright, I would say, but it is no music player. You know, if they chose something else like Gapless or something that is actually kind of like a music player, I feel like that would have been better. But I do see why they chose it, because of it's kind of like just like minimal. It just does like one thing, and that is it plays audio, and you get to decide what audio file you want to load into it. So overall, I would say it is a good default audio player for playing very basic, just single audio files. And when it comes to its controls, of course, you got your, play and pause. You can skip ahead for 10 seconds. You can change the audio. You can change the playback speed also, so you can speed it up or slow it down. It's really up to you. And the other one is just like a hamburger menu. You can open another file if you want to. Keyboard shortcuts if you want to learn how to use the shortcuts on the app. And then, of course, the About section. Now, one of the next popular features that a decent amount of people have been wanting on GNOME is HDR support. Well, it is finally arriving in GNOME 48. If we go to our monitor here, and you can see there is a HDR toggle. We can enable it and disable it, and they have also added a brightness slider, which wasn't there before when I was testing GNOME 48. When the release candidate came out, they added this feature, and well, it does indeed work. I am doing it right now, and my monitor brightness is changing. If you can look on my face, you can see the brightness is changing, so it does work properly. When it comes to how does it look on my monitor, well, I have a BenQ EX2510, and when it comes to HDR on that monitor, it is not the greatest. It doesn't get very bright when HDR is enabled. It's like 400 something nits, which is nowhere like anywhere near HDR, so it doesn't look that great for my monitor. But if your monitor does support the BT2100 standard, then HDR should look pretty damn good for you on your monitor. Now, that's to say, that's just about it when it comes to it. When it comes to HDR in a browser, or when it comes to using HDR in something like MPV, you may have to use, environment variables on like MPV to load a HDR video. When it comes to Wine, Proton, you're going to have to use GameScope if you want to use HDR, and you're going to have to learn the GameScope variables until Proton rebases to Wine Wayland, which won't happen until like Wine 11 probably, when Wayland gets enabled. That's my guess though. And then there's many other things before, like you can actually use HDR as like a regular user, enable it in settings, and it just like automatically enables when you have HDR enabled in these settings. But if you're okay with setting environment variables, HDR being available in GNOME now is really good if you're okay with doing that stuff. But GNOME isn't actually done with HDR. They're going to continue to work on improving it and adding more features to it so that it can be completed and you can use it on basically any type of HDR technology on a monitor. So for example, like add HDR10 mode support, which actually kind of makes sense because my monitor uses HDR10, I'm pretty sure. And on KD Plasma, HDR looks a lot better on this monitor compared to GNOME's HDR mode when I enable it. And then there is plenty of other things, like in phase 2, they need to do tone mappings from PQ to SDR, color space conversions from Rec 2020 to sRGB, signal mapping from sRGB to PQ, and then DRM tone and gamut mappings, transformation for full screen. And then they go do a phase 3, and then basically that should be it when it comes to the Mutter side of GNOME with HDR. And one of the other things that GNOME did decide to merge fully is the color management protocol. Now this is from the Wayland protocols. I just decided to whip this up because, well, that also got merged into staging, which is really nice. That means that basically the protocol itself with HDR, when it comes to gamma, when it comes to ICC profiles, maybe when it comes to like using HDR with like nightlight, all of these like major components are actually complete enough where it gets put into staging, which is basically a really stable repo of protocols in Wayland that should work really well. So this is really good that it was merged into GNOME 48. So when it comes to GNOME working on those color management features, they're going to get the best out of that when it comes to this protocol. Now, one big feature that was supposed to come, I think, last version of GNOME, GNOME 47, but it got delayed if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that, but it's dynamic triple/double buffering. This finally got merged into GNOME 48, and what does this really mean? Well, if we do have a read here, it says use triple buffering if and when the previous frame is running late. This means the next frame will be dispatched on time instead of also starting late. It also triggers a GPU clock boost if deemed necessary by the driver. Although frequency scaling is not required to get a performance gain here, because even a fixed frequency GPU will benefit from oversleeping since CPU/GPU parallelism is improved. If the previous frame is not running late, then we stick to double buffering so there's no latency penalty when the system is able to maintain full frame rate. So basically, if you're running, let's say, I don't know, some really high resolution screen, or you're playing some really high resolution video, you're playing some game on rather maybe medium to low end hardware, let's say some like integrated GPU, if it somehow isn't able to produce the next frame, then triple buffering will be used to try and make it so it's a smooth experience and kind of responsive. It does turn up the latency a little bit, but it makes it a more smoother experience. And this improves the overall experience when using GNOME. If you have a really, let's say, old laptop, or maybe from like 2014, 2015 era, it will perform and just feel a lot more better when you're bouncing around the desktop environment. And I have heard of like newer hardware also improves with triple buffering / double buffering. So really good to see that this feature has been introduced. And it says here at the bottom, I forgot to read, and in my case, this improves 4K overview animations on a basic Intel GPU from 30 FPS to 60 FPS. So you can see where this can greatly improve the experience you have with animations on GNOME, which just makes it a more smoother experience. And the next one that got merged was the cursor shape v1 protocol. So what this does is if an application asks for a cursor, like it wants, I don't know, some really big cursor for some reason, let's just throw that as an example, and it wants it to be like, I don't know, some particular shape, and it wants to do some particular thing with that cursor, it should be able to do that now in applications under GTK and under the needed support through Mutter also, so that it can actually work. And this might improve also if you are on KDE Plasma and you're using a GTK application. Well, the cursor should behave properly now, no matter the application, I'm pretty sure, as KDE Plasma already supports this protocol. And the last one that got introduced into the XGG desktop portal is global shortcuts. I myself have been waiting for this to be introduced, as KDE Plasma has already introduced it like 2 years ago, I think it was, or even longer maybe. And as you can see, GNOME has finally done it. And well, what does this mean? Well, if there's an application, let's say Discord, for example, and it's running under Wayland, well, usually shortcuts don't really work in Discord under Wayland, but there was a workaround that we can use with the desktop portal to introduce global shortcuts, where an application like Discord now can use the shortcuts it usually has in Discord, and then you can actually apply shortcuts now, like keybinds, whatever. Like, I don't know, you want to mute yourself or something, or deafen yourself in a call. You can easily do that now with the global shortcut, and that's why I was particularly like waiting for this to be introduced into the XGG desktop portal on GNOME, because KDE Plasma already had it. So now that both sides, both GNOME and KDE Plasma have it, two major desktop environments, apps like Discord, or maybe any other application that wants to run under Wayland now, can actually use this to get an advantage out of it. And there is applications like GPU Screen Recorder, which does use the global shortcuts when you're not in the overlay mode. So if you're just using the GUI, you're able to use the global shortcuts on KDE Plasma, for example, and it works perfectly. Now, one of the new things in GNOME is the wallpapers. And it's just one wallpaper, you know, every new release, there's one new wallpaper that gets added into GNOME. And as we can see, this is what it looks like. You know, you can comment down below if you like it or hate it, or, you know, if you wanted to see it like change into something else. I think it looks perfectly fine. It looks like a GNOME wallpaper. Very nice. And one big one that has changed with GNOME 48 is the introduction of changing the default font on GNOME. So before it was using Ken Terrell, if I'm saying that correctly, and now it is being replaced with Adwaita fonts. And the actual names of Adwaita font is Adwaita Sans and Adwaita Mono. And when it comes to looking at this font, it is amazing, I would say. It looks extremely nice, especially if I turn off HDR. For some reason on HDR, the text looks extremely sharp. So if I turn off HDR, it just looks so nice, and it fits in with the whole GTK GNOME Adwaita aesthetic. It fits in really nicely. And one application that I decided to use to actually get the Adwaita font to be used properly, because by default, since I have multiple desktops installed, it wasn't using that font. There's a cool new app called Refine, and this application is basically GNOME tweaks, but not really on steroids, just like, it's just better, I would say. Of course, GNOME Tweaks does offer a bit extra things, but Refine offers a lot, I would say, when it comes to some of the things that you can apply to it. But as you can see, we can change the fonts here, and when I switch between KDE Plasma and GNOME, I have to keep reverting it back to Adwaita so that it actually uses the right font. But one of the good things about Refine also is that you can go to the shell and compositor, and if we expand this here, we can use some of the experimental features on GNOME, like VRR, the fractional scaling options, and the X-Wayland native scaling options. So if you're into fractional scaling on GNOME, and let's say you want more fine-tuning of fractional scaling, well, you can enable this, log out, log back in, and then you can get those improved fractional scaling on both when it comes to the finer control of being able to introduce, you know, incrementals of fractional scaling, and the improved version of X-Wayland native scaling under GNOME. And one new feature that also got added was the grouped notifications. So no longer will the notifications that appear here be, you know, extremely long. They will all be grouped now, and you can easily expand them if you have multiple notifications within that application. I wasn't able to really get this in like the 5 hours that I spent on GNOME the last week. I wasn't able to do it, but I will show a screenshot or maybe like a GIF of how, you know, the animations work when it comes to opening up the notifications, just so you can see what it looks like. But a nice feature, I would say, that just improves the notification space a little bit. Now, when it comes to what I would like to see in GNOME, the first one is about screen tearing. Now, I know this is already an opened merge request, so I shouldn't really be saying this, but it is something that I would like to see added maybe in, hopefully, the next release of GNOME, in full screen games to enable tearing, not just enable tearing everywhere, just full screen games. So for people that like, you know, playing FPS games and they want their games to tear significantly, you know, high frame rates like 300 FPS or something in Overwatch, then screen tearing can really benefit from that. So you can get the best latency when it comes to those frames that are being delivered to your monitor. And as you can see here is the merge request in Mutter, which is add support for async, page flip, or tearing. So that is what is supported in KDE Plasma, which is an async page flip, and it works great now. There was improvements with Plasma 6.3.2, I think it was, that improved the detection of async page flip, and it basically works perfectly like every time now when I force games either to use immediate on the presentation mode in games. Yeah, it works perfectly fine. So when this gets added, that will be really nice to see. Now, there is a couple of gripes that I have with GNOME in general. GTK is amazing, I would say. Its toolkit is awesome, and GTK 4 looks awesome, I would say. Very clean. But the problem has got to do with the consistency of the theme itself. So majority of applications will use GTK4, but applications like Firefox, for example, you don't use GTK4. They use a GTK3 theme, and some other applications like to do that. Now, I know that you can use a GTK 3/4 theme to apply and switch like the Firefox theme, for example, to the newer version of GTK, so it looks nicer. But I don't know whose fault it is when it comes to, if it's Firefox's fault when it comes to GTK not being applied to the newest version so it looks nicer, or if it is GNOME's fault when it comes to how the Adwara theme gets applied. And this is another application that doesn't apply GTK properly. It applies an older theme of GTK, which is Lutris, which is surprising because Lutris, I would suspect it would have the newest version of like GTK theming, but it doesn't, sadly. So that's one little gripe I have with GNOME. Not really that big of a deal, I would say. It's something that I usually just ignore, but it is something that I just continuously see, and I have seen a lot of the GNOME applications adapt to GTK4 so that it does look a lot more better and newer when it comes to that newer toolkit. And the other one is about the wine applications that show up when you launch different games. GNOME doesn't pick up the application icons of those games or wine launches that you're running. It will usually just show the basic GNOME icon, which is this like blue icon. I'll show up a screenshot of what it looks like, where I just had like a bunch of different games opened, and I didn't know which ones were which. It's kind of like the Wayland thing, where like you got a bunch of Wayland icons on the bottom, you don't know which one's which. It's the exact same problem with this, where it's just like you don't know which app is which until you like hover over it to see like, oh, it's this application. While on KDE Plasma, at least it tries to show the actual icon shortcut of what that application should be. And if there was one more nitpicky thing, is about GNOME-SOFTWARE. For some reason, GNOME-SOFTWARE is really tied to how like the processes work inside of GNOME-SOFTWARE. So if you install a FLATPAK application like right now, and then you go and search for another application or something, it will be like delayed in a sense. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this last time, where it's just like, it's just really delayed. You have to wait for this application to get installed, so then you can actually look for your next icon you want to install. So it would be really nice if this could be introduced, because I know on KDE Plasma's Discover store, they have improved how you can easily like multitask the Discover application, so you can install multiple applications really quickly, while on GNOME-SOFTWARE you kind of have to install each application one at a time and like go through it pretty slowly, because you have to wait for the previous app that you decided to install. So if that could be improved in some way, and I know that's probably a lot of work when it comes to redoing all of that, so that it doesn't have to wait and you can go out and find a new application. You don't have to wait for that previous application to install. But nonetheless, it would be something I would like to see. So when it comes to GNOME 48, that is releasing on the 19th of March, I would say hopefully it releases on March 19th and it doesn't get any delays. This is looking like one of the best releases of GNOME, I would say. If you're a GNOME user, you are going to 100% enjoy this update. I mean, every update of GNOME is pretty good, I would say, when it comes to what features they introduce. And as you know, GNOME just tries to strive on getting an experience of a bug-free experience with GNOME. So that's always a good thing to have in the back of your mind, is if there's a new version of GNOME, the likelihood of experiencing bugs is pretty low compared to other Linux desktops that do different releases. So I would say I really enjoyed using GNOME, and with GNOME 48, all the new features and all that, it's becoming a really good experience, I would say. Hopefully features like VRR, for example, get added by default, because I haven't experienced any problems with VRR personally, or when it comes to the newer improved fractional scaling or the native X-Wayland scaling. Those things I would really like to see included by default, instead of having to download an extra application to enable those things. So I would like to know your thoughts about GNOME 48. Are you excited for it? Have you tried the RC builds of GNOME 48? I would really like to know. So if you guys did enjoy this video, I definitely would give it a like. I definitely would subscribe to the channel. And thank you to my supporters / members. I will show a text across the screen. Thank you for giving me money every single month. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm trying to find an image of the calendar of the old version, but I can't find it. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da. Ding-ding-ding. Ding-ding-ding. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Bing bing bang 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 bang.